Across the south, one of the coldest of the winter so far. So a hard frost in the south on Friday morning, but then plenty of sunshine here to come on Friday. Another sunny day across the east with lighter winds, probably feeling a bit warmer from Yorkshire down to East Anglia. But it will be cloudier further west, and I think we'll keep a lot of cloud through the day for Wales, northwest England, Northern Ireland, western Scotland. The odd spot of drizzle over the Highlands, but for the vast majority it's dry. Temperatures maybe a touch higher, but it won't feel as warm with the cloudier skies in the west. It will probably feel a bit milder tomorrow in the east without those winds. The wind's picking up further in the northwest with a bit more patchy rain as we head through Friday night. There are weather fronts which will push in here this weekend, bringing some patchy rain to western Scotland. But for most places, it's dry this weekend with a mixture of cloudy spells and a bit of sunshine.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to a special afternoon edition of The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. I'm here for the next hour with a reaction to a dramatic week of politics so far, the latest on Plan B being scrapped and much, much more. But first, here's Rosie with your latest headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 2 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright here in the GB News newsroom to get you up to date. A senior Conservative MP has accused the government of blackmailing members of Parliament out of voting to oust the Prime Minister. Chair of the Public Administration Committee, William Ragg, one of those calling for Boris Johnson to resign, says rebels have faced pressures and intimidation. He's urged MPs to report threats of blackmail to the police.
It is not their function to breach the ministerial code in threatening to withdraw investments from members of Parliament's constituencies which are funded from the public purse. Reports to me and others of members of staff at number 10 Downing Street, special advisers, government ministers and others encouraging the publication of stories in the press seeking to embarrass those who they suspect of lacking confidence in the Prime Minister is similarly unacceptable.
Well, Boris Johnson is adamant there's no evidence to support the allegations. Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle encouraged MPs who experience intimidation to write to him.
While the whipping system is long established, it is, of course, a contempt to obstruct members in the discharge of their duty or to attempt to intimidate a member in their parliamentary conduct by threats.
The The Bury South MP who defected from the Conservatives to the opposition says Labour will give the country the leadership it deserves, not one they are embarrassed by. The Shadow Chancellor, who is in Bury, was asked why she isn't triggering a by-election as a result of the defection. Well, we can find out more. Our national reporter Paul Hawkins is in the constituency and was there. Paul, good afternoon to you. So what did Rachel Reeves have to say?
Yeah, she said that, and she also spoke about the possibility of a by-election, referring to the previous Parliament. She said that some Labour MPs had defected then and she didn't call for by-elections then, and she wouldn't be doing so now. She said, I would say to the government, if you want a by-election, let's have a by-election in every constituency. It's called a general election, so no indication from the Labour Party of any by-election anytime soon. Some in the local Labour Party here disagree with that. They want a by-election. Many people I spoke to say a by-election would only be fair, and because Christian Wakeford sponsored a piece of legislation that would have made it mandatory for defecting MPs to have a by-election, that opens Labour to accusations of hypocrisy.
Thank you, Paul. And Paul will be following developments for us across the day. Now, Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has said she won't be following in England's footsteps and getting rid of all COVID restrictions. Let's find out more. Go to South Queensferry to speak to our Scotland reporter, Davy Donaldson. Davy, so what is Nicola Sturgeon's plan instead?
Yeah, Nicola Sturgeon, she's released in terms of care homes, people being admitted to care homes, that to have 2 weeks isolation, that no longer applies now. So no, Nicola Sturgeon's going to keep with the processes you had in place before in terms of public transport, face masks in public. So that's really the road she's going down. She was questioned by Douglas Ross, the Conservative leader today, who called her handling of the whole Omicron outbreak over the festive season as gung-ho, and also questioned by Anna Sarwar, the Labour leader, with regards to wind power. So he says some of that is questionable in terms of the companies that are involved.
Davy, thank you very much. Now, Ghislaine's Maxwell legal team have filed a motion for a retrial weeks after she was found guilty of grooming underage girls to be sexually abused by Jeffrey Epstein. It's after one juror says he failed to disclose before the trial that he was sexually abused as a child and that he described his experience during deliberations. Well, Maxwell's lawyer says the disclosures could have convinced other members of the jury to convict her. The British socialite is due to be sentenced in June. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has said the EU will respond with massive economic and financial sanctions if there are further attacks from Russia on Ukraine. Well, it comes as US President Joe Biden says he believes Russian President Vladimir Putin will move in on the nation and warns Russia will pay a heavy price if it invades. President Putin has made a list of demands to the West as around 100,000 Russian troops are on Ukraine's border. Emma Raducanu and Andy Murray have been knocked out of the Australian Open. Both were beaten in their second-round matches. US Open champion Raducanu was hampered by blisters on her racket hand. And the three-time Grand Slam champion Andy Murray said he was disappointed and frustrated to go out so early. And a British-Belgian teenager has broken the record to become the youngest woman to fly solo around the world. Sarah Rutherford has landed in Belgium after spending 5 months covering 5 continents in the world's fastest microlight aircraft on her own. The 19-year-old has totted up 51,000 kilometres on the journey and says she wants to show young women they can be ambitious. You are now up to date here on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's return to the briefing with Tom.
Coming up this hour on The Briefing, as the Prime Minister plots his survival after a bruising week, we speak to a political panel on the developments in Westminster. Well, also, Christian Wakeford MP has defected from the Conservatives to Labour. We'll be getting the Labour Party perspective. And as Plan B is scrapped, are we finally entering a world where we learn to live with COVID? We'll ask an expert. And remember to give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me @gbnews. Now, after a dramatic day in Westminster yesterday, it appears that the Prime Minister lives to fight on another day. On his way to PMQs, Boris Johnson must have feared the worst, but he emerged largely unscathed from his cross-examination by the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer. Arguably, the biggest hammer blow for the Prime Minister yesterday came from his own benches, with the former Conservative leadership contender David Davis calling for the PM to resign. Let's take a look at that.
I expect my leaders to shoulder the responsibility for the actions they take. Yesterday, he did the opposite of that. So I'll remind him of a quotation altogether too familiar to him of Leo Amery to Neville Chamberlain. You have sat there too long for all the good you have done. In the name of God, go.
Order. Prime Minister.
I must say to the right honourable gentleman, I don't know what he's talking about, but what I can tell him, I don't know what quotation he's alluding to.
For a biographer of Winston Churchill, I'm not sure I quite believe that he didn't know what famous quotation was being alluded to there. But let's discuss all of that and so much more. Joining me now in the studio to discuss this is our political panel for today. The former Conservative advisor Claire Purcell and Henry Hill, the news editor of the Conservative Home website. Welcome to the show. First of all, let's talk about Boris. And Henry, if you can kick off with how you think Boris performed at Prime Minister's questions, a bit more rambunctious, a bit more positive.
Yeah, he's definitely determined to fight it out. I think that he and his team have concluded that whatever Sue Gray is going to decide in her report, there's not going to be the sort of smoking gun that would force him to resign. And therefore, being the man he is, he's decided that he's going to try and see it through. And I think also the defection of Christian Wakeford has actually probably helped him, because prior to that, the rebellion, every rebellion wants to be a loyal rebellion. So the rebellion was all about we're trying to save the Conservative government, we're trying to deliver the Conservative programme, we want to make sure we win the next general election. The moment Christian went over, having filed a letter, suddenly it started looking like maybe it was about helping Labour, and so given that politics is a tribal business, I think that will have caused some MPs to pull back, and there's definitely a sign that in the short term the rebellion is losing momentum. I don't think it changes the fundamentals. I think that Boris Johnson is probably on the way out. But yes, definitely compared to where he might have been, a better performance than we might have expected.
And I suppose now we turn the conversation to next week, where we're expecting this Sue Gray report to come out. How does Boris navigate that?
Well, I think what people are expecting from the report and what they're going to get are two completely different things. This will be a mainly factual report. It will go through the parties on which day, who was attending, but it will not apportion blame. Sue Gray isn't there to do that. The senior civil servant is a fact-finding mission. So I don't think it's going to give you any answers, but what it will do is rile up the troops either enough to all come together, as Henry says, to put a united front on a rebellion, or actually to come together and decide now is not the time, let's get behind the Prime Minister.
Now, we've heard something else break today. Of course, the chair of the Public Administrations and Constitutional Affairs Committee, PACAC, as it's more pithily known in Parliament, William Ragg MP, has said that he's felt that, or he's been told that some MPs have had the effect of blackmail from whips from advisers in Number 10. Henry, is this normally how whips behave?
I mean, to an extent, I think we should distinguish between how whips normally behave and the specific allegation that's been made here. Whips are not welfare officers, no matter what some modern MPs might tell you. Fundamentally, their job is to maintain discipline, and having, for example, the Black Book is the famous way of doing that. They keep an eye on MPs' indiscretions, and they keep them quiet as long as the MP votes the right way, but always with the risk that they don't. But what's been alleged here is that the government is actually threatening government investment in those seats that's already been promised, which is quite remarkable and very clumsy, especially when you consider the fact that what's making so many of these 29 intake MPs so unhappy in the first place is the dearth. You know, Christian Wakeford was apparently saying, what have I got to put on my leaflets? Now, it's not the government's fault they had a pandemic to deal with for 2 years. But fundamentally, these MPs, their voters very much lent them their votes in 2019. They want to be able to demonstrate that voting Conservative has made a difference. And they've already not got enough to do it. So the idea that you're actually pulling back on that investment shows that the short-term effort to try and bully the Prime Minister's critics into submission is really doing long-term damage to the Conservative Party's electoral interests.
Haven't we always had pork barrel politics? Haven't we always had promises of cash that may be delivered, that may be taken away in exchange for votes?
Well, I mean, I think yes, we have. I mean, the Whip's office will always use some kind of tactic to encourage members to behave in a certain manner, which, you know, is as to be expected. But I think to threaten government funding is a whole new level, and I await to see any details of those threats coming out. And certainly the members of Parliament that I've spoken to this morning, not one of them have had those tactics used against them. So I'm not sure how widely spread this actually is.
It also has to be said that, of course, the Chancellor ultimately controls that funding, and given that he wants to be leader, he's probably not going to be cooperating with Operation Save Boris Johnson at his own expense.
Is there an interesting differentiation we can make here between something that we might describe as not giving extra money to constituencies versus taking away money that has already been promised to constituencies?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, so you might argue that this is a distinction without a difference in some ways, but I think there is a difference between the two. The Tories do this all the time, right? When you see the Conservative by-election campaign, you had the Tory party chairman going around the constituency going, I hope voters will think carefully about who will be best placed to work with Robert Jenrick to get money from the Towns Fund. So, like, this is how they work, but you don't take it back. That's an extra level. I think we should distinguish between doing politics, which is, you know, how it works, and then doing it really badly and clumsily, which, if this has been happening, as we say, we don't know that, doing it really badly, and that's what this is. It really riles people up. People feel a loss more than they miss out on a gain, if you know what I mean.
Now, Christian Wakefield has been holding a press conference today in his seat, so is the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. A lot of questions about whether a by-election will be held. Claire, in your opinion, does a by-election hurt or help Labour at this stage?
It would be a real test of whether Labour could win back any of the so-called red wall seats. And I think that they will be looking at it quite carefully. I suspect nobody at the moment is keen to have a by-election, let alone, you know, Christian Wakefield, you know, looking at it with horror. But it would be a test. And I think that the public and the voters of Bury South actually deserve that chance. They elected in a member of Parliament representing a certain party. Now, you can't just switch and choose. It would be like changing your football team. You know, we just don't do that. So I think they need one, but I don't suspect it's coming anytime soon.
I wonder if there are any disadvantages to holding a by-election from the perspective of the Labour Party. If they're trying to coax over more MPs, potentially that makes that hurdle higher.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, the example of this is the SDP, who all had by-elections or who resisted by-elections precisely because nearly all of them ended up losing their seats. You know, I think Bury South would be an absolutely fascinating contest, not least because Ji-Yeon Park, a Conservative who defected from North Korea, has a really compelling life story, lives in that seat. So the Conservatives could actually run her as a candidate, and I think it would be a much more interesting contest. It is important also to remember that Bury South is not technically part of the Red Wall. It was Tory until 1997. It's not one of these kind of generational shifts.
Yeah, even John Major held it, but it was only won by 402 votes at the last election.
Yeah, precisely. It is a marginal. It is a marginal, and I think that the anti-Semitism stuff especially played a lot of a big role in that. But Labour winning would be good for them, certainly, but I think purely in terms of setting aside any moral question, in terms of just the balance of harms, a loss for them would be a serious block to their momentum, and again, it would just be a hold, so it wouldn't be worth all that much.
Yes, and I suppose, Claire, that when we're thinking about Labour's electoral strategy here, the announcement of this defection just before Prime Minister's questions, they must have known that this would unify Tory benches. Is this because Keir Starmer wants Boris Johnson to stay in place?
Well, I think if you look at it through the prism of Sir Keir Starmer, yes, he would want the Prime Minister to stay in place. At the moment, it's helping him enormously. Having said that, his performance at Prime Minister's questions yesterday, there was a great big own goal against the Prime Minister that Sir Keir Starmer just missed. So I'm not sure that they are developing any kind of future strategy on this. They sort of sit there and go, yeah, he's really bad, and not take the story on.
It's a fascinating situation. Thank you so much for your thoughts right now. We're going to bring in, to get the Labour perspective on the defection of the Tory MP Christian Wakefield, I should say the former Conservative MP Christian Wakefield, former Labour list editor, Peter Edwards. Welcome to the programme, Peter. I suppose the first question I have to throw to you is one that we've just been discussing on the panel. This question of a by-election. Would it hurt or help the Labour Party?
Well, I think there's risks for both big parties in a by-election. For Boris Johnson, another by-election defeat really would finish him off. And we all remember what happened in Chesham and Amersham, where the former Cabinet Minister Cheryl Gillen passed away. There was a by-election a few months ago. But clearly there's risks for Labour. It's a marginal seat, as Henry was saying, and Labour's defence or pushback against Tory criticism would be that Boris Johnson's name was not on the ballot paper in Bury. It was that of the local MP, and his name would continue to be on it, albeit with a Labour red rose on it rather than a Tory blue torch. There are risks to both sides, and I think ultimately that's why there won't be a by-election.
That is the constitutional position. Of course, you do elect your local member of parliament, not a party, not a prime minister. But in reality, is that how it works? We saw with all of those defectors to Change UK, the former Labour and indeed Conservative MPs who changed to a new party, thought they were carrying with them a huge personal vote in their constituencies, and to a man and a woman, all of them lost their seats. Are we telling ourselves a bit of a fiction here when we are talking about people voting for a local member of parliament, when most people probably couldn't name theirs?
It's a mix, isn't it? I think the Change UK MPs were realistic. Some of them were very long-serving in the seat they represented. You have to remember, the ones that left Labour did it for very different reasons. Thankfully, we have moved on, but they left quite understandably, even if I don't agree, over disgust over anti-Semitism, which we all felt. Labour's got on top of that now. I think a by-election is just not going to happen. We can debate who's got most to gain by it, or where the political risk is. But I can't see anyone who's actually going to trigger a by-election. As I said earlier, there's a huge risk for Boris Johnson, and for a bit longer he's the leader of the Tory party, and there's huge risk for Labour, where their spectacular game, it was a coup yesterday,